תראו איזה צהריים מעודד זה. לא רק שאני יודע מה הקריירה הבאה שלי, אני יודע אפילו מה הקריירה אחריה. אז באמת תודה רבה.
Thank you very much. Because the time is short, I'll discuss three main things. The first one is a basic approach towards national security. Second one will be the Palestinian arena. And the third is the northern Iranian front. I'm tying them both together. So let's start. When someone deals with national security matters on the level of decision makers, there is a central question. Is the approach going to be optimistic, action-oriented, or passive and pessimistic? In real life, there's never 100% optimism or 100% anxiety, but you ask yourself, where are you situated? Where is your country situated in each and every moment when they deal with the challenges of national security? The years that started the Oslo process and ended, each one can put it wherever you want it. I think they ended with the end of the disengagement in 2005. There were years that with all the huge challenges, there was an optimistic approach on the Israeli side. We thought that we are going to shape our own destiny for the benefit of future generations. We're waiting for nobody. We're taking an initiative. We're not waiting for anyone. We're going to take risks, and the risks were huge indeed. In those years, what happened is actually, on the one hand, a great change, a very big change in our basic situation, and I'll discuss it later on. But each process, Oslo and the disengagement, they ended with some disappointment, particularly vis-a-vis the expectations that were created amongst the public. And this disappointment that ended in 2005 pushed Israel and the Israeli view to a very pessimistic spot. Those who felt, the one to feel this more than anybody else is our current Prime Minister. And when the basic approach is pessimistic, passive, and it is anchored by fears, so he found a really good ear with the public, because Israel is not a superpower in this region, as Amos Gilad just stated. It is not a very strong state, as Amos Gilad stated 2 minutes ago, but it is actually a state that is on the verge of annihilation at every given moment. And this sentiment was reinforced again and again and again, and pushed Israel to a place where, vis-a-vis its main issues, it is practicing a policy which is more passive, more controlled. There are some positive aspects and some very negative ones as well. So first and foremost, we have to understand where exactly are we situated, and this is what I'm trying to bring to the political arena. I am all for a more optimistic approach, being more sure of ourselves, daring to take more risks, but we have to draw conclusions from what happened in recent years when you were optimistic in other periods of time. So this is a basic approach to life. From here onwards, I would like to analyze the two arenas that I mentioned earlier as the main fronts. As for the Palestinian arena, so to speak, our estimation of what had happened between Oslo and the end of the disengagement, our estimation was wrong. And I'm referring to what the Israeli at large believes. There is a tendency to say that Oslo was a disaster. There is an Israeli intellectual that put out a booklet that is titled The Oslo Catastrophe. And the disengagement, what did the disengagement do? It brought about all the attacks of the missiles and rockets and actually disrupted life in the southern area of Israel, completely disrupted it. These two statements are, as far as I see it, very far from reality. And what do I mean by that? We tend to forget the reality that happened here prior to Oslo. But if you really miss those days, I can share some personal experiences with you. We can share them together. Are we really looking forward to those demonstrations that happened in Nablus or to chase terrorists around the Kasbah of Hebron? It was wonderful, wasn't it? Is this what we are longing for, what we are wishing for our children and grandchildren? I doubt that. We forget how much the friction within the Palestinian cities, the daily friction, was very demanding and highly problematic. The reality that Oslo brought about is a reality of separating life on a very broad spectrum, not perhaps complete separation, but quite broad separation. The disengagement, and here we have a very short memory as well, although we're only 14 years after it happened. And I remind you that the attacks of missiles on the south of Israel started in 2001, and they were very extensive. So the mere fact that we were situated in Gaza did not prevent the missiles coming towards the southern areas. And I remind you of another thing, that the terrorist attacks against the IDF soldiers, against the Jewish public in wherever around Gaza was huge in dimension. Between 2000 to 2005, we lost 175 Israelis in terrorist attacks in Gaza or coming out of Gaza. Since 2005, the end of the disengagement, until these days, 121 Israelis were killed, and this includes all the main operations like Kastled, like the other main operations in Gaza. The rates, and I don't think this is the only index to measure security, but it dropped by 2/3. We have to take this into account when we miss those long gone days. However, what comes next? And I'll say the following. The state of Israel is now facing a decision that's going to decide its life, actually. Are we headed towards annexation or towards separation? Don't think about it as to what's going to happen next month or in the upcoming year. I don't know if we can achieve what I'm going to describe in close proximity of time, but we have to decide where are we headed, what do we want to see happening. If you are talking about separating from the Palestinians, then what we need to do in the field has to be directed there. And if we're talking about annexation, that could happen also tomorrow morning. So what we're doing out there in the field has to be directed there. I'm asking myself, what will better ensure the security of Israel? And I have no doubts there. Separating from the Palestinians is vital. Because the idea of including 2.5 million Palestinians, I think it's the end of the Zionist enterprise. And of course, not to mention those who think that Gaza should be annexed again. We have 4.5 million Palestinians amongst us. Even in the lighter version of 2.5 million Palestinians, the reality that will be created in Israel in the demographic terms is 38% Palestinians, 62% Jews, and I think this is the end of the Zionist enterprise. I would like to refer to this topic from two different directions. Different people, quite wise people, are raising all sorts of ideas of a confederation or a federation. I think that ideas like that are possible amongst the nations who want to cooperate on some level. I do not think that this is the situation between us and the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria. And so federal or confederation ideas would fail. This is one direction. It usually comes from the left wing or the far left. Another idea that I keep hearing about and is quite prevalent amongst the religious Zionists, the right hand of the map, is an idea that says a very simple thing. The situation currently is wonderful. What are you complaining about? There's full autonomy for 95% of the residents, of the inhabitants. They live in places where we hardly intervene. They have their own government. They manage their internal affairs by themselves. So where is the problem? So I'll tell you what the problem is. The current situation where 38% is by Palestinians and 62 is by us. It's just the same percentage as the population I mentioned earlier. And a situation where the daily routine of the Palestinians, the moment they go from one area to another, is ultimately going through friction with Israeli IDF. This is not a stable situation. I don't think that we can let go of it tomorrow morning, but it is not a situation that can create stability for the long term. It will continue fueling the Palestinian violent sentiment, the wish to shake off the Israeli rule, and it doesn't really entail any hope for a quiet future. And so, every Israeli government should ask itself, how does it stabilize the situation for the long term? And for the long term, I think we need to separate. And I'm aware that no separation will be complete. I would like to mention several parameters that are relevant as of tomorrow morning. One, isolating the Judea and Samaria area with some external forces. We did not do it in Gaza. We received many weapons that came from Egypt to the Gaza Strip. In Judea and Samaria, we have to be present at the Jordan River, as long as we feel that lack of control there will create the flourishing of terrorist organizations there. Number two, freedom of operation in Judea and Samaria. Today, we actually find out 70% of the terrorist operations that are planned prior to their happening. Of course, we cannot let it go. But the extent of our operational freedom has to fit the level of violence or potential violence, which is in the Palestinian territory. Right now, we cannot let go of it. These are two aspects that are security aspects, but there are others. One is infrastructure. Our infrastructure and the Palestinians are incorporated. Geography is incorporated. And the conditions that have been formed thus far entail very close cooperation. This refers to water, electricity, sewage. So cooperation has to be of the highest level. Two, commerce. Commerce and trade right now are under quite significant limitations within Judea and Samaria going towards Israel, and of course Judea and Samaria and Gaza Strip. I think that in this respect the State of Israel can take a risk. I think it's minuscule, almost negligible, and encourage trade in order to contribute to the Palestinian economy. And three, separating lives. We have reached with quite a lot of work to separation. While we had done a lot of infrastructure investment, we separated their lives from ours. This decreases friction and contributes to security, but we can do much more. When I was commander of Judea and Samaria, we started creating the infrastructure in order to prevent friction there, inside Judea and Samaria. I don't know if people here remember it, but we started building a wall around Bet Aryeh, Ariel, Gush Etzion, and Immanuel. You can see the remains if you go and visit there. Why did we stop doing that? We stopped doing that because politically wise, it was a very clear statement. These are our future borders. And I think we're going to pay a price later on. We need physical borders. Moreover, we need borders in our consciousness so that we can limit the right, messianic right that is taking us to dangerous areas in Israel. Borders start here and here before it is out there physically in the field. And these borders today in Israel are required more than any other time in the past. And from here going on to Gaza. In Gaza, we find ourselves in a situation where we see lack of a policy. Some would say, how can you say there's no policy? It's very clear what we do in regard to Gaza. No. If you're a slave to the events, if you need to react, then I refer to it as a lack of policy. I think that policy regarding Gaza has to be based on the stick and the carrot, and this, or a carrot, starting with a carrot. First of all, trying to identify our shared interest, the shared values that can stabilize the situation. And I think that the level of violence that Hamas is maintaining does not intend only to maintain a struggle against Israel on a certain level, but it is also a protest that says we can no longer continue living like this. I think that Israel has to take this minuscule risk. I would say it's negligible, almost non-existent. We simply need to change our mind or manner of thought and contribute more and develop Palestinian economy way more. Examples, very simple. The Erez checkpoint was built in a manner that we can transfer thousands of Palestinian workers to Israel. It is standing there empty. Instead of thousands, only several hundreds go through this checkpoint. I spoke with the farmers in the Gaza area on the Israeli side, the southern side. They all say the same thing. We rather have Palestinian workers assisting us. Do you know why? Rather than people from Thailand, workers from Thailand, you need to feed, you need to find them housing 24 hours. You need to take care of them. You need to take care of them during the weekends as well. Each and every Palestinian worker comes and goes back. The cost goes down and the benefit, of course, and the revenues go up. For both sides, why not do it? What's the level of risk in bringing into Israel thousands of Palestinians every day married, 30 years and over, with children? What's the problem? I'm telling you, the risk here is almost zero. There's no reason for us not to do it. If the sentiment, the more peaceful sentiment in Gaza grows stronger, we could bring in external investments. Right now, many countries do not go into Gaza because the situation is unstable. But if we stabilize the situation ourselves, we can create some sort of a wave that will grow, that will continue stabilizing the situation, that is based on economic initiatives. So tell me at this point, well, you're not familiar with the Arabs, it's not going to work, they'll continue with the terrorist activity, perhaps, but what did they lose here? What sort of risk did they take? Going back to the situation that we have today is always possible. The issue of a future operation, military operation in Gaza. I think that in the past 3 operations in Gaza, Israel actually kept repeating the same policy, the same methodology, the same security execution, which actually failed us. What was our assumption? That measurably harming the Hamas military forces and some broad civilian damage will convince Hamas to do what? To stop fighting. Did it work? No, it didn't. It did not. And so Cast-led continued for 22 days, and there's no other option but recognizing the fact that if you really wish to repress the will of fighting of Hamas in future, we will have to handle it in a way more vigorous manner. As long as the military branch is not damaged, they're going to continue willing to fight. As for the civilian suffering, well, they're used to it. They're familiar with our capabilities. They understand the implications. We cannot surprise them. Another military operation, very much like the previous ones, as far as the Palestinians, as far as Hamas, this is familiar. Nothing's going to change. And from here, I go to the northern front. I'm not going to go into a broad analysis because time does not allow that, but I'd like to say a word about the combat in between wars, some sort of a patent. I'd like to put it in context, in the proper perception context, that is. There are four constant efforts for national security. One is intelligence, then it is protection and civilian protection. The third one is fighting. When we need to fight, we do it. And the fourth one is prevention and influence. Prevention and influence. This is the category of prevention and influence. The purpose here is to limit the freedom of operation of your opponent and to increase our freedom of operation. This is prevention and influence. The toolbox is varied. There are, of course, some military aspects, but also diplomatic and economic. Their entire idea is to increase our capacity and decrease our opponents. Doing it like that successfully while preventing deterioration towards a war. Because the moment you go into real fighting, this effort, as an effort, had failed. We need to do our utmost that this fight or this battle in between wars does not escalate into a full war, because this has its prices. And when I look at the level of threat, when I look at the level of Israeli deterrence, Israeli deterrence, I think we need to stop this approach, this pessimistic approach that says we're going to be annihilated. It's around the corner. Methodologically, we're threatening ourselves, we are frightening ourselves. And look at the Israeli media, look at how many times it states that 100,000, 120, 150,000, I also saw, rockets and missiles are being aligned and directed towards Israel. Does the public understand how false this statement is?
Did anyone think before the Six-Day War, Yom Kippur War, to say the following, that the Egyptian army or Syrian army or Jordanian army has such and such a number of mortar shells, and they are aimed at Israel, and therefore they should beware? The lion's share of rockets and missiles are not aimed here to this hotel on Derech Hayam in Herzliya. Most of it has very limited distance, and we are intimidating ourselves. We are creating an atmosphere of fear, and it is needless. And the truth to be told is simple. If the rockets and missiles today are a severe threat, then alongside them being a severe threat, we must say the following. First of all, Israel's ability to attack is very developed. B, Israel's ability to defend itself is the best in the world. And C, the Israeli home front, and don't listen to those who don't say the same. The home front is the most prepared as ever. It's more prepared than anywhere else in the world, and therefore we have always lived under the threat, under such threat. At the time, they were also existential. These days, these threats are not existential. It only has one problematic component, and that is, and we must fight it with all our might, and that is accuracy. because accuracy is capable of really paralyzing essential infrastructure in Israel, particularly if it is a sudden surprise attack. And therefore, because of accuracy, we must continue with this war between wars, and remember all the time that even if we manage the situation well, we can still be on the threshold of war or engage in actual war, and that's what Israel knows and can do. And if I were to sum up what I have said, I will say as the following. Our approach to national security should be that of being able to do things ourselves, but we shouldn't be arrogant. Israel must initiate, particularly in the Palestinian arena. Israel must continue to develop its sources of strength when it comes to both attack and defense, in intelligence and elsewhere, in order to consolidate, strengthen and stabilize. It is balanced strategy, and we know how to do it, and I'm certain that we need to. Thank you very much.